Okay, so good afternoon or good day, everyone. Hmm. So for this session, I will be talking about the continuation of qualitative research writing, particularly on the grounded theory analysis. So our last session focused on open coding process. And as I said, there are two processes that you have to go through, the open coding and later on the grounded theory analysis. So to further understand what grounded theory analysis is, allow me again to present my screen to everyone. So grounded theory analysis is the second section of coding. So in the grounded theory analysis, you already are involving initial analysis from the open coding. And in the open coding, we have noticed that we can capture immediately what the participants mentioned or said. But there is also a way to make it synthesize and make it your own words, and that is to use description. Sometimes when we are looking at the responses of the participants, they do not necessarily mention what they want to feel, but in the context of what they are saying, the meaning emerges. So open coding is the initial part. So the next part is how do we go about categorization and developing themes? And that is where axial coding and selective coding will occur. So that's part of the second phase of the coding, and that is called the grounded theory analysis. Now, let's take an example of, no, particularly the one that is shown on the screen. So this is the transcript excerpt, um, and then we are coding it. In the second phase, what we normally do is that we look at the open coding. So that's the open coding is a product of the initial discussion. So you do it line by line. It could be line by line. Then afterwards, you look at the context and then come up with a code. And then the actual coding is to look at the similar codes that you develop in the primary coding or the initial coding. So how does it look like? It looks like this. For example, there are 50 open coded or codes. And then from the 50, you categorize them or you group them based on their similarity. Their connection can represent a way of organizing them. And when you group them already and you can identify one central theme or central message in the codes, then you can group them as and identify them as category. So for example, these are the open codes. You group them, no? For example, category one, three codes, category two, three codes, so on and so forth. And then you look at their relationship. No? When you do that, that is what we mean by axial coding. So how do we go about it? How do we analyze this? Well, there are ways to do it. No? Number one, you integrate all categories and then group them as core category. And then you also decide what kind of a storyline or theory that can be describes the interrelationship of these categories. So for example, in the illustration, there are open codes, and then these open codes has similarity that can serve as your category. So that is the axis connecting the categories and the open code. So for example, um, conflict, equality, and uh, compromise can fall under collaboration. So notice that the central theme or somehow main idea of these three codes could lead to collaboration. Similarly, the other two is on communication, and the other one is another category. And then when you look at the axial category or category, you need to tell, no, what particular words or phrase can be used in order to group them as one. And when they can be collapsed as one, or a term that will encompass all these categories, these can lead to the theme. So for example, we have collaboration, communication, and understanding team. So meaning to say, these three words can be described into one word, and the word is teamwork. No? So somehow, the general theme is teamwork. They have three categories: collaboration, communication, understanding team, and then the codes. Those are the product of the open coding and descriptive coding. And then, like what I've said, you select the theme. Now, in selecting coding leading to themes, this can be used as your pattern. For example, theme 1, cancer diagnosis and treatment. So under cancer diagnosis and treatment, there are three categories: peace diagnosis, and treatment. Under theme 2, social support across the cancer experience. So there are three categories: family support, friend support, church support. So you will notice that's how we develop themes, categories now from the codes. Always remember that the themes are the outcomes of the coding and categorization process. So just think of category as word or phrases describing some segment of your data that is explicit, whereas the theme is a phrase or sentence describing more subtle and tacit process. The theme cluster or form patterns. So let's take some example, and this is our example on how themes are developed. But there are codes and categories, and then there's themes later on. Aside from that, class, you also need to develop a code book, because remember, every theme has meaning. Every category has meaning. So what is a code book? A code book is like a dictionary or guidebook of all codes in a project, or perhaps in your developed themes categories. It should provide guideline for consistent coding across coders. So if these are the definition of the theme or the categories, then we need to be consistent. The categories and theme must have code. It must have definition and description of the code, and some example of text excerpt that represents a code. So how does it look like when you are preparing your code book? It looks like this. So for example, if this is the code satisfaction, what does satisfaction means? And what are the example from the code? Reason for exercise, what does it mean by that? And then what is the example? Usually, class, when you are thinking of codes or categories, it must be supported by literature as well, or it could be an emerging terminology, no, that can be operationalized based on your study. So if qualitative research would focus on a subjective way of analyzing things, how do we ensure the reliability of the themes, the categories, and the codes? So there is such thing as intercoder agreement or intercoder reliability. In this kind of way, you measure the reliability of coding, determining of two people coding the data independently. So meaning to say, if you are the researcher, you need another person to also do it for you, so that it can ensure that there is no bias. So it's like an expert's way. And then there's another person who will validate or triangulate later on whether your developed themes and categories is acceptable and consistent all throughout. At the same time, the use of intercoder agreement or intercoder reliability is to improve consistency and quality of analysis. We want to ensure that there is no bias in our result. Hence, we are looking for experts or another person to do it for us, not really for doing for us, but to do it so that we can ensure our reliability. Sometimes there are also software that can calculate the intercoder agreement, or sometimes it can be a consensus of codes or revised definition. So let's proceed to the strategies for trustworthiness of your result, no? So the trustworthiness of qualitative research would include the following. No? Number one, in the area of quantitative uh, research, you must have internal validity, external validity, reliability, and objectivity. But for qualitative research, you need to include the credibility, translatability, dependability, and confirmability. So what does it mean by that? Trustworthiness refers to the confidence in the truth of the findings. So meaning to say, when you think of trustworthiness, we are ensuring its internal validity. No? Are the findings we present based on the data analysis reasonable? Or it also answered the question, do the findings reflect participants' view or experience? So trustworthiness is also one way of showing that the findings have applicability in other contexts. So that will move towards external validity. No? And the question we want to answer here is that, do my findings apply to other people, time period, so on and so forth. Another thing about trustworthiness is the neutrality of the researcher. We also need to ensure that the researcher's reality versus the participant's reality keep the focus on your participant's reality. We also know that there are moments that when we write the paper, are we really writing it based on the participant's answer or based on our answer? So the equivalency of objectivity in the quantitative research and showing that the findings are consistent, study, procedure are documented and distinguishable, meaning to say that the consistency in the interview and analysis process are really reliable. So you need to answer the question, am I consistent in the way I am analyzing my data, or am I consistent in the way I am doing interviews or observations? So what are the threats of trustworthiness, no, that you need to be mindful of? Number one, reactivity. No, when you talk about reactivity, these are the potential or potentially distorting effects of the researcher's presence on participants' beliefs and behavior. It is also similar with social desirability bias, wherein the tendency of the survey respondents to answer question in a manner that it will be viewed favorably by others. Second is the researcher's biases. So we need to ignore that the data doesn't support your conclusion, or perhaps asking leading question to solicit the answers that you want, or you are choosing informant who are fit within your worldview. And it could be respondents' biases. So meaning to say there should be an ineffective recall, no? Or it could be an answer that they think the researcher want to hear. Or perhaps some respondents or participants are withholding information or they are lying. So how and what are the ways to enhance trustworthiness? So number one, you need to develop a coding system, especially if you're doing quali, or you need to ensure that the sample size is enough for quanti. It is also important to triangulate if you're doing qualitative research, no? A member checking another person to iterator, a prolonged engagement. Like for example, if you're doing or getting sample from quantitative, the prolonged engagement might affect, no? So all these things should be included, no, and should be done in order to ensure that you maintain the trustworthiness of your result. like text description, peer debriefing, peer review, negative case analysis, audit trials, and so on and so forth. So how is it being done? For example, in prolonged engagement. So you address credibility here, meaning to say you build a rapport and trust relationship with the study participants. This is when you do informal interview, then semi-formal interview before you lead to formal interview. You need to ensure that the participants are comfortable disclosing information and helps to ameliorate reactivity and respondent bias. Another way is to triangulate or triangulation. So one way to do triangulation is to have an observation checklist, an interview, and to document well. And this addresses credibility and confirmability. We need to ensure that the observed triangulation are coming from a multiple observer in a single study to achieve intersubjectivity agreement. And another is data triangulation. So use more than one data source. No, you don't just focus on the interview, you also look at the observational data and other documents. Also, another way is to enhance trustworthiness is peer debriefing. It addresses credibility. It's also a way to review the data research process by someone who is familiar with the research, like for example, the phenomenon being studied. You also need to present this study finding or listen to alternative points of view. No? Like, for example, a type of group flexibility, like the fresh perspective that guards against bias. Another way is member checking. Now, in a member checking, we share study findings with participants to ensure that they agree with the conclusion. And if the participants do not agree, you need to obtain additional information and incorporate their comments into final product. One way also is to do audit trial or audit trail rather. A transparent description of the research steps taken from start of the research project to the development and reporting of finding should be done, no? And it includes getting the raw data, no? The data collection and the analysis process notes. Okay, another thing according to Tong and Saintbury is using the curric, no? In the curric, there are particular guidelines that we follow, no? In order to measure and to ensure reliability. For APA format, there's a way of presenting it on how we present the data in terms of reporting, no? There should be a themes and then categories and description and then some examples taken, no? In the tabular form. So having said all these things, what can we learn as we end our discussion on qualitative research gathering and interpreting data? No? Number one, that the basic understanding of some types of commonly used codes and the coding process might not be is needed, and it should be accomplished by everyone who's doing qualitative research. And whenever approaches, coding types, ways, you need to develop themes and note the process by completing the memos. That's why I am requiring my students to have memos whenever you're doing encoding, interviewing, or analyzing the data, because that will help me triangulate the the authenticity and trustworthiness of your result. Next, an understanding of how, despite being a different method, qualitative research employ means of trustworthiness and rigor, akin to quantitative research. So although qualitative has a very high level of subjectivity, we need to ensure that it is also equated to quantitative research, which is highly quantifiable. Hence, we are ensuring the reliability and validity of the result. And finally, to uncover the individual experiences, the qualitative process from study formulation, the data collection, analysis, and presentation is iterative, meaning because there is really a possibility that it can change. No, that will depend on the expert's opinion, based on the audit trail, or it could be because of the participants. So that is the end of our session on qualitative, and I hope that you have learned something today.